The government shutdown, or partial government shutdown to be precise, is definitely having an impact around the country as news organizations have rushed to cover.
The shutdown has hit 800,000 federal workers around the country the hardest. No work, no pay.
They live from paycheck to paycheck, unfortunately.
These are real people's lives that are being affected and ruined and thrown into chaos.
I'm getting tired of feeling like a ping pong ball.
In Virginia, the shock is still hitting Thomas Fuller, a single father to 7-year-old Nikita. He's an IT consultant, a contract worker for the Department of Labor, among tens of thousands of federal contractors impacted.
But are we getting a clear picture of the shutdown's effects, or is there some exaggeration involved? Joining us now, James Rosen, chief Washington correspondent for Fox News, and David Zerwick, television and media critic of the Baltimore Sun. James, in your reporting, how real is the impact? We've seen a lot of stories like the ones I just played, and are people trying to spin you about whether the impact is larger or smaller than you might think?
The angle of the shutdown that I have been covering this past week for Fox News involved the basic logistics of what's going to stay open, what won't, who's affected, how are the government agencies making their decisions about what's essential, non-essential, and I've also paid, I have to tell you, particular attention to the terminology that due to the sensitivities of government workers, it's no longer described as essential or non-essential. You're called accepted from the shutdown and not accepted from the shutdown, which is nice. But in terms of exaggeration, I think that we have seen some efforts by both parties and by their respective supporters in opinionated media to do that.
On the Fox News website, for example, instead of calling this a shutdown, it's often referred to as a slim down, as if it was some kind of Weight Watchers exercise, and I think that's a mistake. It's a loaded term. David, when networks and local stations in Baltimore, for example, interview furloughed workers, people who've lost their jobs, angry tourists, people losing services, is that straight reporting, or is it a kind of advocacy?
Well, you know, everything that I've seen, and I spend 4 hours a day trying to watch this coverage, there is so much of, if a story is done that shows someone victimized by the shutdown, it's almost always contextualized in who's to blame for this, you know, and that's the game in Washington, of course, that's insane, you know, and it reached its apex, I think, this week at the Veterans Memorial, you know, when politicians from both sides were trying to run over there to be with the World War II veterans to say they were for them. It was somebody else's fault that they had to remove a barrier to get in.
Yeah, well, that was an episode that did not look good for the administration, no matter how you want to spin it.
Yes.
But I mentioned earlier that CNN's Dana Bash had asked Harry Reid, the Senate Majority Leader, about the Republican plan to restore partial funding for certain agencies, including NIH. Let's take a little look at that clip.
You all talked about children with cancer unable to go to clinical trials. Given what you said, will you at least pass that? And if not, aren't you playing the same political games that Republicans are?
This is to have someone of your intelligence suggest such a thing maybe means you're irresponsible and reckless.
James.
Well, that was the dark side of Harry Reid. It's not the first time we've seen it surface, and it's probably the worst example of the Democrats in this episode and their use and abuse of the media, where there have been skillful examples. For example, every time that you log on to whitehouse.gov, the very first thing you see is a pop-up box that tells you, we are sorry, but due to the government's Congress failing to pass a budget, we can't give you all the usual services on this website that we'd like to. So there have been skillful uses. That was not one of them.
Since you strap yourself to a chair, David, and watched hours of this coverage, give us a brief overview of the way the three cable networks have covered this and some of their
the Obamacare coverage was outrageous, Howie. It really was. On MSNBC, 36 hours after the exchanges were open, everyone was reporting widespread glitches, and glitches was a kind word. In some cases, they just shut down.
Meltdown.
Ed Schultz looks into the camera on MSNBC and says, there are no glitches, there are no glitches. He says Fox is manufacturing talk about glitches. Honest to God, you know, he's an opinion guy, he can have his own opinion, but you can't have your own facts.
What about the others?
CNN fires up the CNN Express and puts Dr. Sanjay Gupta on his road trip from South Carolina up to Baltimore. He comes up to Baltimore, he interviews one operator, minimizes all the downplay, and it really plays, when you watch it, like a call now. Operators are standing by. If you call in the next 10 minutes, we'll give you 2 health insurance. It was pathetic to see this.
And Fox?
Fox, you know that Harry Reid clip right there with Dana Bash? Well, not surprisingly, Sean Hannity wound up calling Reid a twisted old, and then he stopped himself. It went ad hominem. Now, listen, Reid was ignorant there, insensitive.
But you're saying the rhetoric a little too harsh?
I would say you don't attack the man. You attack the policy.
Since this is actually affecting, you know, food inspections, and the CIA has had furloughs and all kinds of ripple effects here, do you think, James, that there's just been too much media spin about winners and losers as opposed to the effect on real people, and whether the D.C. press is kind of in a bubble here?
Let me tell you what I think the contribution of media to the government shutdown is. Okay, media are playing a fundamental role in how we got here, and I don't think people have paid attention to that, Howie. Why is there such dysfunction and gridlock and paralysis in Congress? Why is there such polarization? I think a plausible answer, and it'll fall to political scientists and historians to really suss this out, but I think it's because there's been a democratization of media. Everybody has YouTube, everybody has platform, Twitter, Facebook, it makes it much easier to primary a lawmaker. And that's why they don't have relationships. They're back in their districts.
James Rosen with the context. Thanks very much. Zurich, we'll see you later. Send me a tweet about our show during this hour, @Howard Kurtz. We'll read the best messages at the end of the program. After the break,